She wanted an adventure, but her obsession would cost much more than she imagined. Amid a game of desire, secrets and betrayal, the reckless pursuit of the forbidden led this story to a dark conclusion. In your sexual obsession with the groom's father cost a life, you will learn the disturbing details of a real case that exposed the depths of ambition and desire, where impulsive choices transformed a family relationship into an irredeemable tragedy. Prepare for a journey that reveals how far someone can go in search of power and satisfaction, and how that path can lead to a devastating downfall. Before we dive into the details of this dark story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. In upcoming videos, we'll bring you real cases like this one, where impulsive choices and forbidden secrets led to devastating consequences. These stories serve as a warning about the dangers of ambition and relationships that hide invisible risks. Subscribe now and don't miss the next videos. You'll see how far the pursuit of power and satisfaction can lead. Ezra Blackwood, the costly success. Ezra Blackwood was a name that commanded respect. To everyone looking from the outside, he was the perfect image of success. A fearless, visionary businessman who built one of America's largest tech companies from practically nothing. Blackwood Innovations was not just a company, it was an empire that Ezra had raised with his own hands. Every decision, every step, every sacrifice led him to a status that few achieve, but the price of that success was something no one saw. Behind the brilliant businessman was a story marked by profound sacrifices, especially regarding his family. Sometimes, the darkest secrets hide behind seemingly perfect lives. In this story, we will see how a risky obsession and a thoughtless quest for adventure resulted in a devastating and tragic fate. Do you know how to identify when someone is crossing dangerous boundaries in search of power and satisfaction? In the first pinned comment, I've left the book How to Identify a Potential Psychopath in Your Daily Life, for you to grab now and discover the signs that can save you from similar traps. Ezra grew up in a middle-class family, where the struggle for a better life fueled all his dreams. From a young age, he knew he wanted something beyond what his parents had achieved. His talent for business gradually revealed itself, and at 30, Ezra founded Blackwood Innovations. But the journey to the top didn't allow him to look to the side. The endless work, sleepless nights, ambitious plans, everything consumed his energy and focus. Nothing and no one seemed more important than that goal. And in that reckless pursuit, he ended up sacrificing what might have been his greatest asset, his relationship with his wife and, most importantly, with his only son, Liam. Ezra's wife, Evelyn, was a kind and patient woman who loved her husband but often found herself alone in the marriage. Over time, the distance between them only grew. She tried to fill the void by caring for Liam, but it was clear that the boy was also suffering from his father's absence. Liam saw Ezra as a distant figure, an almost mythical presence who appeared only during formal occasions, like birthdays and holidays, but was never truly present. The years passed, and the success of Blackwood Innovations continued to grow, as did the emotional distance between Ezra and his family. When Evelyn was diagnosed with cancer, Ezra was caught off guard. Work consumed him so much that he hadn't noticed the signs that something was wrong. Although he tried to be present during her treatment, it was too late to repair years of absence and neglect. Evelyn passed away in 2010, leaving Ezra and Liam completely lost, each trying to cope with the loss in their own way. It was only after Evelyn's death that Ezra finally felt the weight of what he had left behind. The loss of his wife made him look at Liam and realize that the boy, now a young adult, was practically a stranger. In an attempt to reconnect, Ezra began surrounding him with financial support, helping him make connections, and introducing him to the business world. He hoped this would create a bridge, but it was like trying to mend a fabric that was already too torn. Liam carried deep wounds, resentments that had accumulated over time and couldn't be resolved with money. Liam wanted a real connection, an authentic relationship with his father, something that Ezra, despite all his efforts, seemed unable to provide. The emotional distance between them was a chasm that was difficult to overcome. And so, while Ezra continued to seek redemption, Liam tried to find a way to live under the shadow of a father who, to him, always seemed more interested in success than in family. This cold and distant relationship between father and son was like an open wound that never healed and only seemed to deepen over time. And it would be this emptiness, this lack of true connection between the two, that would lead to a devastating tragedy, an event that would forever change the fate of the Blackwood family. Liam Blackwood, living in his father's shadow. Liam Blackwood grew up watching the grand figure of his father dominate everything around him. He was Ezra Blackwood's son, heir to an empire, and this weighed on him like an impossible burden. To many, it seemed that Liam had the ideal life, access to the best schools, travel opportunities, the Blackwood name opening doors wherever he went. But for Liam, that shadow was suffocating. From a young age, Liam felt that he could never be good enough. No matter how hard he tried, the comparisons to his father were inevitable. He didn't want to follow in Ezra's footsteps, but the weight of expectations, both from his father and the world, pressured him to achieve something extraordinary. Thus, Liam began to take risks with his own businesses, hoping to build something of his own and finally find an identity outside his father's shadow. His first attempt was a restaurant, something very different from the tech world his father inhabited. He was excited, convinced he had found his own path. He invested every piece of his heart, working long hours, trying to make the business grow. But within months, financial problems began to arise. Lack of experience, poor management. The restaurant didn't last long, and the dream fell apart. It was a harsh blow, and Liam blamed himself for the failure. But he didn't give up. Instead, he launched into a new project, a tech startup, an app that would help small businesses manage inventory. Liam thought this time he was on the right track, more aligned with what his father did. He surrounded himself with a small team, worked night after night to the point of exhaustion. However, once again, difficulties came. The pressure from investors, lack of capital, planning mistakes. Everything collapsed again, leaving Liam frustrated and drained. The weight of expectations can become a suffocating shadow, like the one surrounding Liam and his desire to build something of his own away from his father's name. Small signs of wear, sometimes imperceptible, can turn into a deep emotional chasm. Identifying these signs is essential to avoid the silent collapse that so many people face. With that in mind, I've left a book in the first pinned comment that can help you better understand the signs of emotional pressure and manipulation, how to identify a potential psychopath in your daily life. Grab your copy now and stay alert to the signs before it's too late. This sequence of failures began to affect him deeply. Every time a business failed, he felt as if he were proving to everyone, and most importantly to himself, that he would never be able to be like his father. He wanted to be recognized for his own worth, but the world always seemed to remember that he was just Ezra Blackwood's son. And the more he tried to escape that image, the deeper he sank into his own insecurity. Finally, in one last attempt to find direction, Liam opened a digital marketing agency. It wasn't a gigantic business, but this time he achieved some stability. The agency was moderately successful, as he liked to say, although it was far from the grand standards that the Blackwood name suggested. Liam knew his father viewed it as a minor occupation, something far beneath what he expected for his son. Over time, Liam began to feel defeated. He found himself surrounded by unmet expectations, inevitable comparisons, and a sense of failure that seemed to follow every step he took. The shadow of Ezra Blackwood was always there, hovering over him, reminding him of his limitations. Even in calm moments, when he managed to keep the agency running, he felt it would never be enough. Deep down, Liam yearned for something that was his alone, a life free from that pressure. This feeling of inadequacy he carried was like an open wound, pulsating every time he remembered his failures. He was trapped in a cycle of self-criticism, increasingly isolated, with a growing sense that he would never find his own path. It was at this point, amid these feelings, that Liam met Melody Sinclair. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope, as if he had finally found someone who saw him as he was, just Liam, and not Ezra Blackwood's son. This new relationship seemed to be what he had been searching for, a life where he didn't have to prove himself, where he could be seen and valued for who he was. But that hope wouldn't last long. In fact, he was about to discover that Melody was also a piece in a much more dangerous game than he had imagined. Melody Sinclair, the charming ambition. Melody Sinclair was the type of person who didn't let the past define who she would be. Raised in a dysfunctional home, with a teenage mother and an absent father, she had a childhood marked by difficulties and uncertainties. She moved between different homes and schools, always in search of some stability that never seemed to arrive. But Melody was resilient. From an early age, she learned that to survive, she would need to fight for every little bit of security she could gain. Over the years, Melody developed a sharp survival instinct. She studied, worked, and strived like few people did. She dreamed of a better life, and for her, success was the only path. Melody wanted something solid that would give her the comfort and security she had never had. She earned a scholarship to study at a respected university in Boston, where she continued to fight to maintain her grades while also working to pay her expenses. Between part-time jobs and all-nighters, she excelled and secured an internship at a prestigious marketing firm shortly after graduation. This opportunity was a turning point in Melody's life. She began to stand out for her intelligence and charisma, quickly rising through the ranks of the company. But no matter how much her career was advancing, something still seemed to be missing. Melody longed for stability but also desired recognition, the kind of respect and influence that only a powerful name could bring. Now think, have you ever found yourself or known someone who, in a situation where they desperately wanted to achieve a goal, set aside who they really were? Have you ever gotten involved in something that seemed to offer security and stability but ultimately cost you more than you expected? Like Melody, sometimes we are drawn to what seems promising, only to find ourselves on dangerous paths. Share your experiences or thoughts in the comments. Your story could help others reflect before getting lost in risky choices. It was then that she met Liam Blackwood. They bumped into each other at a coffee shop, and upon hearing his last name, Melody immediately knew who his father was. The Blackwoods were well known and admired in the business world, and Liam's father, Ezra, was practically a legend. Melody saw in that encounter something much bigger than a simple meeting. She saw a chance to finally access the world she had always longed to belong to. In the following meetings, Melody gradually earned Liam's trust and heart. He was different from what she had expected. Instead of a confident and secure man, she found someone a bit lost, a gentle soul struggling against the shadow of expectations he could never meet. And while Melody genuinely liked Liam, seeing in him a rare kindness, she also knew that the relationship could open doors to something even greater. With Liam, she could finally have what she had always dreamed of: status, security, and above all, a chance to enter the Blackwood family's life. As their relationship deepened, Melody began attending dinners and events where she encountered figures of high society. She was seen alongside Liam and gradually became part of the circle he frequented. However, the temptation to get even closer to the top was something Melody couldn't ignore. She knew that the path to the heart of the Blackwood Empire passed through someone beyond Liam. It passed through Ezra Blackwood, the man who had built it all. Ezra fascinated her. When she met him at a charity event organized by Blackwood Innovations, Melody was captivated by the confidence and magnetism of Liam's father. Ezra was what Liam was trying to be, but with a natural imposing presence, a charisma that dominated the room. He was the kind of person who didn't need to ask for attention, it came to him. In a casual conversation, Ezra and Melody discussed topics Liam had never liked: literature, travel, art. It was clear to her that Ezra was a man of much more depth than his business facade revealed. And by the end of that night, something else began to germinate in her heart, a forbidden and dangerous attraction. Despite caring for Liam, Melody couldn't help the thoughts that led her to imagine a life beside Ezra. It would be the fulfillment of all her desires. She wondered if she was being unfair, if her feelings weren't genuine, but every time she remembered the hardships she had faced, the constant struggle for survival, that ambitious side of her resurfaced, reminding her that no one cared about her choices as long as they were good for her. Liam seemed enchanted and never suspected Melody's ambitions. And with each step closer to the Blackwood family, she felt that she was getting nearer to what she had always desired. Fate, however, was about to test the limits of that ambition. Soon, she would find herself trapped in a game where the stakes would be much higher, jeopardizing everything she had built up to that point. And this time, there would be no turning back. The forbidden attraction. It was on a fall evening, during the glamorous charity gala organized by Blackwood Innovations, that Melody and Ezra finally found themselves alone in a setting that seemed to conspire in favor of something inevitable. The mansion was filled with soft lights, music in the background, and discreet laughter echoing among the guests. Liam was present, of course, nervously circulating among investors and trying to secure the support of potential partners. Melody, dressed in a long emerald gown that sparkled under the lights, glided alongside Liam, greeting people and smiling, but at the same time, she felt her gaze drawn to a strong and silent presence: Ezra Blackwood. As Liam stepped away for a moment, Ezra and Melody exchanged a quick but intense glance that spoke more than words ever could. Ezra, in his perfectly tailored suit and carefully combed gray hair, radiated confidence and magnetism. There was something between them, a silent understanding, as if a mutual secret was about to be revealed. In the midst of the event, they casually found themselves in one of the side rooms of the mansion. It was a conversation that started innocently, almost like a game of words. They talked about art, literature, what attracted them in life, and what moved them. As the conversation progressed, they drew closer, in a circle that seemed to shrink with each passing moment. Melody felt that every word from Ezra was like a key unlocking a door inside her, a door she had never had the courage to open. Ezra, in turn, found in Melody a vitality he hadn't experienced in years, an energy that made him feel alive again, something he hadn't felt since the time he was with his late wife, Evelyn. With their hearts racing and breaths held, they looked into each other's eyes for a moment that felt like an eternity. And then, it happened. They didn't need to say anything. Ezra's fingers lightly brushed against Melody's hand, and they both knew they had crossed an invisible line that could never be undone. The attraction was intense, almost irresistible, and in that moment, any guilt was swept away by the wave of emotion and desire enveloping them. In the days that followed, they both tried to rationalize what they felt. Ezra, despite being a meticulous and rational man, was deeply ensnared in his attraction to Melody. She made him feel young, desired, and more than that, understood. Melody, on the other hand, still cared for Liam and in some way, wanted to maintain the relationship, but she felt unable to pull away from Ezra. The power and confidence he exuded were intoxicating, and she was becoming increasingly trapped in that web of confusing feelings. Their exchanges became more and more risky. It started with lingering glances, whispered conversations, and furtive meetings. Soon, they began to meet in discreet locations, hidden cafes, nearly deserted parks, and even at the Blackwood mansion during times they knew Liam would be out on work commitments. Each moment they spent together was a dangerous game, a risk that was becoming addictive. With every touch and every meeting, guilt seemed to increase, but at the same time, something stronger propelled them forward. Ezra was torn between loyalty to his son and the overwhelming passion he felt for Melody. Melody, in turn, knew she was on a path of no return, but she felt she couldn't escape Ezra's magnetism. She tried to tell herself that it was just a phase, a fleeting desire, but she knew it ran deeper than that. The forbidden attraction consumed them, and they both learned to live a double life. In public, they acted as if nothing had changed. They maintained discretion, exchanging only brief glances and contained smiles. But in private, they plunged into a connection so intense it seemed to transcend any blood ties, any moral rules. They were entangled in a secret that threatened to consume not just their relationship but everything around them. And with each encounter, the line between right and wrong grew thinner, as if the world around them was about to crumble, just waiting for the right moment to collapse. They knew they were playing with fire, but caught in a trap of passion and ambition, they couldn't, or didn't want to, stop. Liam's distrust grows. Slowly, Liam began to notice that something was different about Melody. He had always known her as a vibrant person present, with an easy smile and a sparkle in her eye. But suddenly, she seemed distant, as if her mind were elsewhere. During the dinners they shared, Melody became lost in thought, fiddling with her food without much appetite. In conversations, she offered vague smiles, and when he asked if everything was okay, she would quickly change the subject. Sometimes the line between right and wrong starts to fade, and small signs show that something much bigger is unfolding. A glance, an unexplained absence, or an evasive answer can be indications that something is deeply wrong. These signs are valuable, and often, ignoring them can be costly. To help you identify these clues before it's too late, I've pinned an essential book in the first comment: How to Identify a Potential Psychopath in Your Daily Life. Grab your copy now and learn to recognize the hidden signs that could save you and those around you. These changes began to bother Liam, but at first, he thought it might just be work stress. Melody was an ambitious, dedicated woman, and he knew she faced challenges at the agency where she worked. However, as the days passed, the absences and excuses began to multiply. Melody, who had always been punctual, started arriving late to their meetings, making up stories about endless meetings or unexpected traffic. Liam tried to ignore the feelings that were surfacing, telling himself he was overreacting, but he couldn't shake the discomfort growing in his chest. Gradually, his insecurity began to transform into doubt. He noticed that Melody sometimes left the room to take calls that seemed too urgent to delay. On a few occasions, he caught her sending texts with a subtle smile, and as soon as she noticed his presence, she quickly tucked her phone away, claiming it was just something work-related. But there was something about her behavior that didn't seem right. The peak of his suspicion came one night when Liam detected an unfamiliar scent on Melody's scarf, something striking, a perfume he had never smelled before that evoked a vague memory he couldn't identify. That detail tormented him for days until he finally decided to do what he never imagined he would be capable of: investigate Melody. He began to pay attention to everything she did, the places she frequented, and the excuses she made. And every detail he uncovered, every inconsistency, heightened his anguish and the certainty that something was deeply wrong. On a sleepless night, Liam made the decision that would change the course of the situation. Determined to discover the truth, he hired a private detective. This step brought him a mix of relief and guilt. Relief knowing he would finally have answers, and guilt for doubting the person he trusted the most. He felt torn, but the pain of doubt had become unbearable. The detective began to discreetly follow her, documenting her movements and noting any details that might seem suspicious. It didn't take long for the first reports to start coming in. They contained seemingly trivial information: Melody leaving a cafe, visiting an art gallery, or walking alone in a park. But what caught Liam's attention was the fact that in some of those places, Melody was not alone. The photos the detective provided showed Melody talking to someone Liam knew very well but had never imagined seeing alongside his girlfriend, his own father, Ezra Blackwood. And although he tried to convince himself that they were just casual encounters, something in their behavior, in the closeness, in Melody's and Ezra's expressions suggested an intimacy that went beyond a casual conversation. With each new meeting recorded, Liam felt the pain of betrayal deepen, transforming into anger and despair. His world seemed to be crumbling, and he no longer knew whom to trust. The suspicion that had started as a minor annoyance was now becoming a bitter certainty. He knew he was about to uncover a truth that would forever change his life and his relationship with the two people closest to him. This discovery left him feeling unsteady, but the need for answers was stronger. He knew the truth was about to emerge, and with a heavy heart, he decided he would face whatever came, not realizing that the revelations ahead would bring tragic and irreversible consequences. The discovery and the confrontation. After weeks of feeding his suspicion and accumulating evidence, Liam was becoming increasingly impatient. His doubts had transformed into a devastating certainty, but he needed to see with his own eyes to finally confront Melody and his father. On a muggy August morning, the private detective Liam had hired notified him of an important discovery. Melody was on her way to a beach house in the area, one of the Blackwood family's exclusive properties. Liam knew then that it was time for the truth. Hiding his anguish, he told Melody he had a work commitment that day, but in reality he followed her car, being careful not to be seen. The drive to the beach house felt endless, and with every mile, his heart raced faster. In a corner of his mind, there was still a small hope that he was mistaken, that it was all just a misunderstanding. But as he approached the house and parked discreetly, he saw something that removed any doubt: his father's car parked in the driveway. Liam remained still for a moment, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, trying to process what this meant. A mix of anger and disappointment washed over him, as if a weight were pulling him down, but at the same time, a primal force pushed him to act. He got out of the car and walked toward the house. The door was unlocked, as if neither of them expected to be interrupted in that secret refuge. Inside the house, silence was broken only by the sound of waves crashing against the shore in the background. Liam moved slowly, hearing muffled murmurs coming from upstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. As he climbed the stairs, he approached the bedroom, and upon opening the door, he confronted the scene that until that moment had only existed in his worst nightmares: Melody and his father, Ezra, together in a moment of undeniable intimacy. The shock hit him like a wave, but was quickly replaced by uncontrollable fury. Without thinking, he shouted, causing both of them to separate immediately, expressions of terror and surprise on their faces. Melody tried to cover herself, while Ezra stood frozen, speechless. "How could you do this to me?" Liam roared, his voice laden with pain and disbelief. "You're my father. And you, Melody, I trusted you, I loved you. How could you betray me like this?" The words came out like knives, cutting through the silence of the room and piercing each of those present. Ezra attempted to calm the situation, raising his hands in a gesture of appeasement, but Liam was out of control. He lunged forward, grabbing his father by the collar of his shirt, his eyes filled with tears and rage. "You have no idea how hard I tried to be worthy of your respect. And now I find out you take away the only person I thought loved me." Melody, also in tears, tried to intervene, reaching out to touch Liam, but he pushed her away with a look of disdain. "I don't want to hear anything from you. There's nothing that can justify this betrayal." The accusations echoed in the room, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. Liam, consumed by pain and fury, finally threw a punch at Ezra, who tried to dodge but was hit. The fight turned into a physical and emotional struggle, with father and son exchanging blows while Melody watched in horror, unable to intervene. "All I did was try to get closer to you," Ezra shouted, his voice choked with a mix of guilt and frustration. "But you never recognized that, Liam. You've always been ungrateful. You were never a father to me." Liam shot back, his voice thick with emotion. "You always put your empire above everything and everyone. You can't even see what you've done." The cutting words seemed to fill the air with bitterness, as if each sentence were a more painful blow than the last. The physical fight soon lost momentum, but the resentment and pain were clear. Finally, Liam, exhausted and with a face red from anger and tears, looked at Melody with one last look of disdain. "I hope you found what you were looking for," he said, before leaving the house and descending the stairs, leaving behind a silent father and a woman devastated by guilt. The pain of that betrayal would be forever etched in him, just as the weight of the truth he now knew would be. He understood that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The shadow of his father, which he had always tried to overcome, had now destroyed the only thing he still valued. The tragedy. The argument between Liam and Ezra had reached a point of no return. The exchanged words could not be taken back, and each one had cut even deeper into the wounds they both carried. Liam, consumed by hatred and disappointment, threw at his father the truth of all that he felt, every frustrated expectation, the constant absence, the disdain. Ezra, on the other hand, defended himself as best he could, though his words revealed a mix of guilt and repressed anger. The room felt heavy with a dark weight, while Melody, in panic, watched everything with tears streaming down her face, knowing that any intervention from her would only make the situation worse. The fight calmed for a moment, with Liam staring intently at Ezra, and Ezra staring back in silence. But when Liam turned toward the door to leave, he threw one more harsh statement, a final sentence that hit Ezra like a slap. "You've always been an empty man. A father who never deserved any of this." These words were the trigger for Ezra. In a moment of impulsive fury, he lunged at Liam, grabbing him by the arm. "You know nothing about what I've done for you," he shouted, his voice choked with desperation. Liam tried to break free, but Ezra's shove, fueled by anger and the weight of guilt, pushed him harder than he intended. Liam lost his balance, and in a moment that seemed to stretch out in slow motion, he stumbled backward toward the balcony. The room fell into absolute silence, except for the hollow sound of Liam's feet hitting the floor as he tried to steady himself, and then in a terrifying instant, he toppled backward, plummeting from the balcony. Ezra and Melody watched, paralyzed, as Liam fell from the third floor, his body twisting in the air before hitting the ground with a brutal impact. The sound of his body colliding with the concrete floor echoed through the house, slicing through the air like a knife, followed only by the cold and empty silence that hung in the atmosphere. Ezra didn't move. He could barely process what had just happened. Melody, in absolute shock, brought her hands to her mouth, her face contorted with horror. Below, Liam's body lay motionless, grotesquely sprawled on the ground, surrounded by a halo of blood that slowly began to expand. The impact of the fall had been fatal. His only son, the man he had desperately tried to reconnect with, now lay dead by his own hand, in a moment of impulse that would change their lives forever. Desperate, Ezra ran to the balcony, looking down, and for a second, all he felt was an enormous and irreparable loss. But when Melody approached, still crying and unsure of what to do, shock gave way to panic. Ezra's mind began to race. He knew that if he didn't do something, everything he had built would be gone. He would be considered responsible for his own son's death, a personal tragedy that would soon turn into a public scandal. "We need to think. We need to figure this out in a way that doesn't involve us," he said in a hoarse, desperate voice, gripping Melody's arm. She looked at him in horror, unable to believe what he was suggesting. But Ezra continued, "If they find out it was a confrontation, a shove, the press, the police, no one will believe it was an accident." The weight of the words hung over them. Melody, caught between fear and guilt, hesitated, but realized she was just as entangled in the situation as Ezra. In a silent and grim agreement, the two began to plan how they would conceal what had truly happened. They quickly crafted a narrative suggesting that Liam had been drinking excessively and, in a moment of emotional turmoil, had fallen from the balcony. Ezra and Melody would play the roles of a concerned father and a devastated girlfriend who tried to help him but were unable to prevent the accident. As the night wore on, they cleaned up any evidence that might suggest a fight, rearranged the scene, and prepared for the inevitable interrogation. Every detail had to be meticulously thought out. Ezra knew that any slip could condemn them. When the police arrived, alerted by neighbors who heard Melody's scream, Ezra and she were ready with their versions, trying to show sadness and shock over Liam's tragic death. Ezra, composed as never before, recounted the story with calculated sorrow, describing Liam as someone emotionally troubled. Melody, still trembling, corroborated every word, adding details that lent credibility to their version. The plan seemed to be working, but both knew they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Every word they spoke, every tear they shed, was just another layer of a disguise that deep down, they both feared they couldn't sustain forever. And as the police moved away, satisfied with the preliminary statement, Ezra and Melody exchanged a heavy glance, understanding that from that moment on, their lives were intertwined forever in a secret that would cost far more than either of them had ever imagined. The truth comes to light. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Ezra and Melody's version of Liam's accidental fall appeared credible, especially with the emotional history they fabricated for him. The police believed the initial story, recording the case as a family tragedy in which, apparently, a troubled son had lost control of his emotions, resulting in a fatal accident. However, as days passed and the investigation deepened, small details began to emerge. Details that initially seemed insignificant, but together formed a darker puzzle. The first inconsistency came from the forensic reports. The analysis of Liam's body indicated that he had tried to balance himself before the fall, which was not typical of someone in a state of intoxication or distress. Additionally, the injuries on his arms and hands suggested signs of a struggle, of resistance, as if he had been pushed or had tried to defend himself. Investigators began to question the narrative of Ezra and Melody, and upon re-examining their testimonies, they noticed subtle gaps and contradictions in what both had said. One critical point arose when neighbors were interviewed again. One mentioned hearing a heated argument just before the fall, something that Melody and Ezra had not mentioned. Furthermore, detectives discovered that Liam had hired a private investigator to monitor Melody's movements. When questioned about this, Ezra and Melody became nervous and stumbled over their answers, showing signs of anxiety that caught the investigators' attention. the mask of calmness and control began to unravel. Under constant pressure and with the media growing increasingly interested in the case, Melody began to crack. The weight of guilt crushed her, each night was worse than the last, and she could barely look at herself in the mirror. The lies, the omissions, the guilt over Liam's death, all of it tormented her. She was emotionally exhausted, and the pressure from the interrogations increased with each passing day. Finally, during a particularly intense questioning session, Melody couldn't take it anymore. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted, between sobs, the truth about her forbidden relationship with Ezra. In a rush, she confessed that there had been a fight between father and son on the night of Liam's death and that he had been pushed. The revelation hit the investigators like a bomb, and they immediately confronted Ezra with Melody's confession. Ezra, seeing that there was no longer any way to hide the truth, also eventually gave in. In a resigned tone, he took responsibility for the shove that resulted in Liam's fatal fall, detailing the moment of rage that led him to act impulsively. As he recounted the story, his voice trembled, and it was clear that, despite all the justifications, the weight of guilt was overwhelming. Ezra knew that by trying to cover up the crime, he had not only lost the public's respect but also the dignity he had built throughout his life. With the confessions, the case quickly turned into a public scandal. Newspaper headlines blared the collapse of one of the region's most prominent families, and Ezra Blackwood's downfall was treated as an epic tragedy. A man who, in his quest for power and personal satisfaction, had ultimately destroyed everything he loved. Melody was charged with complicity and obstruction of justice, while Ezra faced charges of involuntary manslaughter and attempting to cover up the crime. The trial was short and devastating. The confessions weighed heavily, and both were convicted. Ezra received a 15-year sentence for involuntary manslaughter, while Melody was sentenced to 5 years for her role in the cover-up and for lying to authorities. Their reputations were shattered. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of power and success, was now associated with betrayal, scandal, and tragedy. In the cold, solitary cell, Ezra finally realized the extent of his downfall. The weight of guilt and the loss of his son gnawed at him from within, and he knew that the mark of that night would haunt him forever. Melody, although with a lighter sentence, also carried a guilt that no punishment could erase. In trying to achieve what she had always desired, a life of luxury and stability, she had lost what remained of her integrity and betrayed the only man who truly cared for her. Thus, the truth finally came to light, but the cost was high. The empire that Ezra had built crumbled, and to the public, that family would never be seen the same way again. If you've made it this far, please give a like. Understanding the signs of manipulation and unchecked ambition can even save lives, preventing others from making the same mistakes or getting involved in dangerous relationships. Like now and help spread a message of caution and awareness. Conclusion. The conclusion of this tragic crime reveals, more than the end of an investigation, a complex and profound portrait of the destruction caused by pride, ambition, and unrestrained desire. At the center of the tragedy was Ezra Blackwood, a man who, in seeking power and success at any cost, ended up ruining everything he had left of value: his relationship with his only son, Liam, and with it, his own humanity. This was not just the story of a crime, it was the fall of a family and the ruin of a legacy built with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Liam Blackwood, raised in the shadow of his father's empire, always yearned for something that Ezra had never been able to offer him: a true connection and a chance to prove himself outside the constraints of a powerful surname. Liam's quest for identity and recognition led him to countless failures, which only heightened his insecurity and frustration of living in the shadow of an absent and distant father. When he met Melody, he thought he had found someone who saw him for who he really was. However, their relationship, which seemed like a refuge, ultimately became the trap that would unleash the worst moment of his life. Melody Sinclair, for her part, represents ambition in its most dangerous form. Raised amid difficulties and deprivation, she grew up with a burning desire for stability and respect, something only the name Blackwood could provide. Even if she had genuinely cared for Liam at some point, the temptation to be close to Ezra, a powerful and seductive man, proved stronger. Melody was drawn to the power and influence that Ezra represented, and by giving in to this forbidden relationship, she betrayed both Liam and her own values. Her role in the story reflects the seduction of power, which often obscures what truly matters, and in this case, led her to become entangled in a destructive plan from which she could never emerge unscathed. The culmination of the triangle of betrayal, hatred, and resentment was the fatal fight between father and son. A final clash that exposed years of repressed grievances, resentments, and the absence of true love that had so marked the lives of the Blackwoods. The moment Ezra, in an impulsive act, pushed his own son to his death, his existence was reduced to what he had tried to avoid throughout his life: the complete and irreparable loss of his family and his legacy. He found himself stripped bare before his own guilt, realizing that the success for which he had sacrificed everything had become his greatest prison. The desperate attempt to conceal the truth, the calculated plan to hide the facts, and the decision to manipulate the narrative only intensified the weight of guilt on both of them. Ezra and Melody tried to maintain a facade, but under the scrutiny of a well-conducted investigation, each of their lies was unraveled. The truth, as inevitable as always, emerged, and both had to face the consequences of their actions. The conviction of Ezra and Melody brought an official end to the investigation, but not closure to the pain and void left by Liam's death. Ezra was sentenced to years in prison. Time that would serve as punishment and also as a chance for reflection, though no sentence could repair the loss of his son or alleviate the guilt that now was part of his very essence. Melody, despite receiving a lighter sentence, would forever carry the mark of betrayal and the awareness that her choices had led her down an irreversible path of destruction. When the truth finally comes to light, the consequences are inevitable, and the weight of wrong choices becomes impossible to ignore. Often, signs of manipulation, betrayal, and lies are present before disaster strikes, yet go unnoticed. To help you learn to recognize these signs and prevent stories of betrayal and destruction from repeating, I've pinned the book How to Identify a Potential Psychopath in Your Daily Life in the first comment. Grab your copy now and protect yourself before the lies become irreparable. This crime, above all, served as a grim reminder of the consequences of unrestrained ambition and the pursuit of power without limits. Ezra Blackwood, once synonymous with prestige, became a symbol of pride, greed, and self-sabotage. His downfall was swift and brutal, exposing the fragility of what he believed to be unshakable. And you, what do you think? Does unchecked ambition always lead to dark paths, or are there limits that each person can define? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts on the outcome for Ezra and Melody. Did they pay the right price for their actions? Let's discuss the lessons and warnings this case leaves us. In the end, the story of the Blackwoods serves as a tragic warning. In a life where love, respect, and honesty are sacrificed for status and power, the consequences can be devastating. This case was not just about the investigation of a crime, but about a man's failure to see what truly matters, and how that blindness cost him not only respect and success but the love and life of his own son. The Blackwood family, once powerful and admired, became a bitter example of what happens when the pursuit of power becomes more important than human connection and dignity. I'm leaving here a series of videos about crimes marked by betrayal and devastating choices, just like the case of Ezra and Melody. Each story brings valuable lessons for you to learn how to identify signs of danger and manipulation before it's too late. Follow the upcoming videos and stay tuned to these real cases. This could make all the difference in protecting you and your loved ones. Thank you for watching until the end. Subscribe to the channel and continue receiving our upcoming content. Until the next video.